Lenny, can you talk a little bit about what does insights mean to you and your organization?
From our perspective, it is those bits of information that expose a flaw in the current processes and ways of working within our customer base, and that allow us then leverage that flaw to position ourselves as a natural partner to do business with.
And Shalom, we spoke earlier, and you sort of said in your introduction, you've got this high eligibility rate, which means you've got a massive audience or universe of people that could be your customers. So how do you use insights to start to think about who should be your customer?
I think it was interesting for us because we started off by making a bunch of mistakes, using a bunch of marketing channels that traditionally work for others. And what we learned was using those channels didn't necessarily attract the businesses that were right for us. So we ended up turning the problem on its head, and we started going at it from a credit perspective. So who would we, based on credit signals, actually lend to? I think using the data available through sort of third parties, publicly available data, as well as data that was internal to us around businesses that we were better placed to help. Overlaying all that was the real change. That's what drove the real change for us around being able to target the right people, and then within that there is a real ability with the richness of the data that's available today to dig into characteristics that define certain segments within that wider market. And that was then what allowed us to go out to different segments with stories and messages that were more relevant from a more sort of business and personal perspective. Coming from a non-sort of traditional marketing background, I think the first 3 months I was like trying to figure out what this persona stuff was and how I'd apply it to B2B. And what came through at the end was actually understand your businesses as personas and really find the commonalities among those business sectors, because a manufacturing senior decision maker they're completely different people, right, across their industry. And trying to find what matters to them is probably, there's only one thing that really matters, which is like their business and how dedicated they are to the growth of that business. So understanding that business and going out to them with those messages was really what changed our ability to connect with those customers.
What have you sort of found in terms of the Zendesk view of insights? How is it used there? And how might that be different from what you've experienced before?
Yeah, I think ultimately, insights are about what are you trying to achieve, right? So what's the goal? What are you trying to get out of that? And having the information first and foremost, right? And so at Zendesk, it's providing our customers with that information from their own customers, right? And then leveraging that. We have a customer called Kano. I don't know if any of you have children. They give you this kind of Lego type thing to make computers and also help you code. And so they're a customer of ours, and what they do is their peak time is this 2-hour window on Christmas Day when the kids are scrambling around. And so in order for them to support them, they need to be able to leverage that data to create more insights, to create more AI, to be able to answer these customers quickly. And the more they have this information, the more that they digest it and then create more answers and insights, the faster they can reach their customers and support them. So it's ultimately having that information and what you're trying to achieve.
How do you use insights to affect that?
Bridging sort of the qualitative data you have about your customers and sort of the quantitative data that you have. So we did, as Sir Shalom was mentioning, we had a good sort of persona-based model of a lot of our different customers on the consumer side of our businesses, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, our consumer publications. But then actually taking that and identifying and overlaying as much data that we could get, both first-party data, so usage, information about those customers, but also a lot of triangulating with a lot of third-party data as well. So information that we can find out about those people to sort of build actual predictive models effectively of, first of all, classifiers to say if somebody new showed up on one of our properties, could we actually figure out what persona they may be in? And then from those sort of persona classifications, which we started very in a very sort of coarse way, but have gotten much more granular over time. For each of those sort of persona groups and those classifications, what are the actions we take to sort of move them along their sort of membership journey with us? So on the consumer side, that's really paid dividends for us. We've crossed the 3 million member mark for the Wall Street Journal. On our B2B side, it is a little bit more of a difficult task, because besides sort of how you're classifying and structuring and understanding your different businesses that are interacting with you across the whole portfolio, you're also trying to understand angles of the different sort of buying centers versus the users within those. We still have a lot more to go on that journey, but we do find that it is sort of using the same pattern of what is the data that we have ourselves and what is the sort of data that we can license in or generate ourselves, third-party data about those businesses as well, to help us sort of better build insights about who those companies and those people are.
Can you give us an example of when you've done that or been a part of that in your career, where you've used data and technology to move from just getting it done to actually being able to scale efficiently?
Yeah, that's a rough story, but I'll tell you about it. So prior to Foundry, I was on the founding team at IDEO, which is essentially AI for content marketing. We built a content intelligence platform. And initially, when we started that business, we were selling essentially technology. Loads of people bought it because it was cool and different. Our customers were Diageo, Unilever, the SlimFast brand, really, really cool brands that we sold quite high value contracts into early on, and then they would all churn the next year because it was a cool thing to buy. It was different from what the kind of other competitors were doing at that time. Well worth trying, buying it through an agency, and then the next year they would all fall away. So we'd have these real peaks and troughs, and you couldn't scale the business that way, but we were winning. We were taking any of those when they came, and then the board sat us down and asked us the challenging question of how are you going to start closing deals that are not going to churn after the first 12 months, but are going to be around for the next 5 years to kind of make that payback period work. And we had to move away from essentially what was happening at that time is we were having these serendipitous moments of a funded initiative that we encountered, right? It's not like we were selling anything great, but we had something to sell, and there was somebody who had the responsibility to innovate within Diageo, within Unilever, wherever. And we had these serendipitous moments early in the life of the business. That was never going to be a scalable way to grow the enterprise. So as opposed to waiting for kind of those serendipitous moments to occur, the challenge became how do you generate demand at scale? And two things happened that support both what Shalom has said. One is we had to define some criteria around who are the people that buy this kind of technology, who has this problem. So the persona idea came into play quite meaningfully, except that personas as we defined them back then were useless the moment that we created them, because that's quite a static data set. And it's no indicator for funded initiative either, right? Like you can understand who works at a particular business, who works in a particular vertical, but that data is static, and that data might be out of date by the time that you run that LinkedIn search, that you compile that list of the people that you want to speak to. So it was not a reliable set of information that we could then leverage to create demand, essentially. So that had to be stitched to something else, which was how do we then discover, in addition to who is making the decisions of these organizations, that's actually different to what the key drivers of change are within organizations. And when you have that merger or that kind of occurrence of decision makers who have problems and key drivers of change that are going to get funded no matter what, if you can message them the right way, we now had the opportunity to scale a business. So that took us away from retail, CPG, and landed us in wealth and asset management, where there was a real problem, and the problem was not even apparent to the customer base, right? We introduced a new insight. We came in and said, okay, you've all been inundated with the statistic that 70% of B2B content sits unused. That became a commodity. Everybody was hearing that, but nobody was doing anything about it, because if everybody's suffering with the problem, nobody's beating anybody else. Everybody's quite comfortable with that. So what we went and did was to kind of double click on the insights idea, was we did some first party research to say, okay, what is the actual cost to these businesses of producing 70% of content that nobody ever reads. Finally, we needed to discover what are the key drivers of change. That mean that if we walk into any room with the right person on the other side of the table, we can tell a story that means the status quo is so loose that doing nothing is the worst option. Even if they don't choose us, they're going to do something with somebody to solve that problem because we found the gem. We found the thing that was going to be the key driver of change. And that insight took us from $1 million ARR to 5 or 6 million ARR in about 24 months in the early stage of a startup. And so that was how we were able to leverage insights, personas, and the key drivers of change to create tension in the conversation and the story.
You're leading a sales team, you're leading a platform that is a globalized platform.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with this fact that you've got this tension of the ability to scale, but also the need to be relevant to your local markets?
Yeah, well, I guess there's kind of two answers to that then really, probably in terms of scaling the teams, right? And then as we're growing, at the pace we're growing, we need to continue, and it's kind of a little bit back to the last conversation, the last panel around what your strategy is around that, and making sure the math and the science works out from the product and the, you know, and what accounts, what you can go after, right? And we have our great team in sales operations that help us with that every year, so that's always interesting conversations. But then around us being able to technology providers be able to scale to our customers is ultimately the most important. Without that, we can't scale our business. So we wouldn't be in business this long if we could not scale with our customers. And we attract a lot of the disruptors in the industry. A couple of examples. Some ones like Airbnb, who have been a customer of ours since 2011, have over 100 million customers. Their customers are also like yourselves, or they're also hosts. So the complexity around that and the data around that is so crucial for them to continue to grow at the rate they're growing in 10 years. And then we've got customers like Starling Bank, which a lot of you've heard about. They're in the news quite a bit. Their customer base has grown 5 times in 9 months, from like 45,000 about 220,000. Really interesting story. And for us to be able to manage that at Zendesk is crucial for us as a business, right? So we can continue to scale internally as well as so we can scale with our customers. So.
And Shalom and Clancy, not everybody's got sort of large marketing budgets, and I think depending on where you're at in the stage of growth, you need to be a little bit creative and mindful of sort of doing more with less. And Shalom, maybe you can talk a little bit about how have you done that? So how have you been able to sort of get over performance, not necessarily radically increasing your marketing spend?
Sure. Doing more with less was really about changing our mindset and using what we had to really consider the data that was saying, we were very focused on this number of leads, cost per lead, which on the face of it looked quite good. And it took a lot of honesty to look at that number and say, actually, is that the right metric for us to be trying to optimize? And for some businesses it is, and for some products it is, absolutely. But I think for us it was really about then looking a bit further and saying, actually, what is the cost per acquisition that we're seeing? And that's where we really started to think differently. And what we were able to do by looking at the data, honestly, was actually say the number of leads that we get every month isn't as important, and the cost per lead isn't as important. So we're now sitting in a place where the number of leads is halved, and the cost per lead has gone up, but our cost per acquisition is 30% of what it used to be. And that's really, I think, where we've been able to do a lot more with less, but being honest about what metrics and what insights we really should be looking at, and this will be very specific to each business.
Clancy, how about for you?
Yeah, I think it's for established businesses like Dow Jones, we've been around 138 years. I think the time of digital transformation kind of led to a lot of companies like ours. I wasn't here for this, but to kind of have a false sense of abundance of what you could do with sort of digital marketing. So I think we've all sort of experienced that in the past where it felt like every company was almost spamming you with every single sort of upsell kind of opportunity that they had. We have definitely become much more tuned towards what exactly is the best thing to put in front of each one of our customers, whether it's that they're calling our call center, whether they're receiving a newsletter from us. What is the best thing for given the data that we have about them, all the insights we have about them, to really try to push them up again this sort of membership curve. That's been, it's definitely, first of all, lowered again our sort of cost per acquisition or cost per upsell on some of these things, but it's also led to just a much better customer experience overall. So on our consumer side, we're still doing much of that as well on our B2B side, which is, if we have to prioritize our sales and marketing strategy, the best way you could do that is with more data into that sort of prioritization function.
Great, and just one more question before sort of open it up to the audience. Karen, you're in a unique position in that you've got, obviously you're selling into business environments, but ultimately they're using that as a primary customer interaction tool. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about sort of what the experience is like when you're trying to sell something that is really mission critical to them, delivering satisfaction to their customers? How does that sort of create a unique relationship or responsibility, I guess, in terms of your organization and going in and how you sell against that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you're right. It is mission critical, right? Yeah. Dealing with your customers, and when you're dealing with like fintech or financial industries where the customers' our expectation is that they get a response right away, right? Anytime of the day, and immediate. So for us as a platform and to compete in that arena, we need to be able to provide those methods for our customers and their customers to interact them at any time and any place. And I think though, but a little bit on top of that, there is also the fact that customers want to be able to, the mission critical side of it, but customers are also looking for more of an experience on top of that now. That's starting to build, there's having the different channels is important, and it's still important. A lot of customers don't, a lot of companies don't even have multi-channels in terms of interacting, but beyond that now, companies are looking for an experience. If you go to a retail brand, you want an experience now. You want to be able to interact. You might want to chat. You may want to but you want to come back. So we have to build on that mission critical response, and then also use that data to provide that experience as well.
What's the number one piece of advice that you have, or caution? So either sort of positive or caution for companies looking to embrace data.
Our first port of call is to go and understand if I'm sitting opposite somebody with an offer for software, whatever it is, what is the reason why they would choose to do nothing over to do a deal with me? And how can I triangulate that with information that means that is such a potent idea when it's presented to them that doing nothing becomes the worst option? Because anytime that I leave a meeting, a presentation, and people still feel like they can go back to their way of working, I've failed in my presentation of that information because I've not destabilized their preferences in a way that ensures that they are going to choose to change. So once we've figured out what are our key drivers of change for that particular vertical, then we have to figure out how do we create urgency and uniqueness in that opportunity. And that's about amplifying the size and the speed of the problem. Upfront understanding what are the things that need to happen psychologically with the prospect in order for them to do a deal, and having data and insights that speak specifically to those things around status quo bias, urgency and uniqueness, and solution differentiation and maturity modeling. If you have that kind of inside information, then there's no way that you shouldn't be able to at least create a qualified opportunity.
Great. Shalom?
Yeah, I think just more generally, I think as you said, we're in this age where there's a deluge of data. It's so accessible and the format is fantastic. And I think it's just about making sure we're thinking about the right metrics for each of us, making sure we can hone in on that, and then honing in within that on insights that are actually actionable. And I think that sort of resonates with what you said. Beyond that, I think the bit that sometimes gets forgotten is if you're trying to embrace data and launch that initiative in your company, making sure that you're taking the entire company on that journey with you and making that data and the use of that data accessible to the entire business. I think that served us very well, even in our sort of infancy. So yeah.
Karen?
Yeah, just kind of just on top of what Shalom says around kind of the whole business, I guess we're coming along with it. I mean, I guess it's quite simple in a way too, in terms of, you know, what are you trying to achieve, right? What's the goal? It sounds simple, right? It's easier said than done, but ultimately, what are you trying to achieve? What are those metrics? What insights are you trying to get from that? I do think then you need to have the right infrastructure and technology to help you with that, and maybe the cultural change that goes with that as well within the organization. All of those, I think, are part of the pieces. And I think in terms of what to avoid, as you said, I think just doing nothing, right? There's a lot of, go down the journey a lot with companies, and we get quite far, and they've made such headway, and then we do nothing. So that's the shame, I guess, of it all, when you get that far.
Nancy, I know that you talked a little bit about some of your successes. You said you had a few failures. Can you share the one caution? What's the one thing that everyone should avoid?
So actually, I'll build on sort of what Shalom and Karen mentioned, which is, prior to Dow Jones, I've mainly worked at startups and technology companies. And coming to a company that was a little bit more established.
Mature.
Yeah. There's a tendency for all sort of new technology or anything that involves a transformation to be very much sort of like centralized and a lot of gatekeeping around it. And so my original job at Dow Jones was Chief Data Officer, which is very much sort of put in there this is the guy who will figure out what we do about data, which is kind of a tough gig to wander into. But where you really see it work well is when the organizations that, it does start from more of a ground up mentality about what to do with data. I think there's enough people in an organization like Dow Jones or any large organization or even small organization where the people who can actually benefit from better customer insight, access to data, can actually tell you what they need to do their jobs better, and actually sort of going through that process with them and really letting them be part of that bears much more fruit than just sort of saying, let's go from a top-down mentality about let's all use data. Here's the data you need to do your job. It's much easier to have it come from the people who know what they need to. If they're going in to go talk to a customer, they know what they need to know, and it can really help articulate that.
Great. Please join me in thanking the panel for all their experiences and insights today.